just start my my share. So great. So how's that? Can we see the PowerPoint? Perfect. Great. So thanks everybody. So I'm actually in South Africa conducting a mini MBA program. So there's a very slight chance we might experience load shedding. If we do, I'll pop back on as soon as I can. But hopefully that won't be the case. All right. So so welcome. You know, we've got 30 minutes really to talk about perhaps learning and memory, but it's all part of the sort of whole piece around change. You know, if we want people to do things different ways, certainly if we want them to be more innovative, if we want them to embrace new ideas and creativity, etc. In general, you know, people need to change the way in which they conduct themselves and behave within business. So that's the remit. That's what I thought we'd do today. So it's learning and memory. Of course, yeah, right. Sorry, just give me a second. Just started at the wrong place there. So yeah, so just to introduce myself. So I'm Tony Wakefield. I'm the CEO of Outcome One, principal consultant. So that's a very small training organization based around leadership, a lot of sort of creativity, a lot of business type topic areas. But a lot of what we've been doing recently has been based on the brain. So it's brain-based leadership. So we call it people-oriented, brain-aligned leadership. And that's where a lot of this material comes from. It's based on a lot of research over the last 2 to 3 years. I'm also full-time with a company called Ray Castle. So I deliver training courses for Ray Castle, and it's in the telecoms, digital and high-tech sectors, which is great because that's all about innovation. It's all about getting the most from teams of people that really want to make a difference in the world. I'm also a member of the Institute of Leadership and Management. Previously, I've been the founding MD of Informa Telecoms Academy and also Informa Innovation Academies. I've worked with lots of different companies around the world like Google, Vodafone, HP, MTN, where I am now actually. And I'm an ex-Navy helicopter pilot, which was great fun, but I never saw the family. So I had to make some decisions there and decide to be the family man, which has been great. Right, so where does this material come from? Well, as I said, it's associated with one of our, probably, you know, the signature course that we've got at Outcome One, which is neuro-aligned leadership. We actually used the title people-oriented, brain-aligned. And the way I see it is it's almost like a unified theory of leadership. And we tackle lots of different areas, but we group it into four main areas. The first one is we look at the brain from a leader's perspective. So let me just grab my laser pointer. So we look at the brain from a leader's perspective, and we come up with a model which looks at the different areas of the brain and what's involved at different times in terms of how people are operating, whether they're relaxed, whether they're stimulated, whether they're trying to think, whether just in normal, you know, sort of everyday low energy mode. So that's quite interesting. We then move on to look at brain chemicals and how we as leaders can influence those brain chemicals to get people operating in the right way, to build the right sort of culture and build the right sort of work environment. We then look at developing individuals and teams. Again, just drawing heavily on how the brain works to do that, so that as leaders, we're in the best position to be able to develop our individuals, teams. And then, because, you know, it's not too complicated, we do it in a way which is fairly simple. We then, there is quite a lot to it. We then look at some simple models, and we draw on 3 simple models, one to help individuals, one to help teams, and then the other one comes at it from a organizational perspective. Throughout all of this, we're talking about change. We're talking about people doing things differently. And if we as leaders try and get people to do things differently, you know, we are effectively asking them to learn. to learn new knowledge, new skills, and especially new behaviours. But it also involves change of mindset. Culture is a huge part of this. So what we said is this year, because I recognise one or two of you from last year. Last year we did a session on the brain and creativity. What we thought we'd do in this session this year is we'd look at learning, because as I said, if we're trying to get people to be the sort of processes of learning or a barrier to change. So we said, as we advertised this, that it would be a short session that's exploring how the brain science can be used to inform our learning and development strategies in our transition to a work culture that embraces creativity and innovation. So it's very much focused on the actual learning itself. So first of all, we're going to look at just the basics. What is learning? And learning is, well, let's get straight to it. Let's have a look at the neurons. And at the end of the day, in our brain, you've got 100 billion neurons. And when we have some sort of stimulus, when somebody does something or we see something, if there's some sort of trigger, very often we go into an automatic response, right? And that automatic response effectively is just it's a path where neurons have formed really strong connections that determine how we respond to things. And if we're not really taking control, i.e. if we're not really thinking using our prefrontal cortex, if we're just letting our everyday part of our brain, the limbic system, sort of take control, low energy, natural responses to things, we're going to use those neural pathways that we put in place. And how have they got there? Well, it's through the learning process. And it could be that it's, it involves neural pathways which cause us to take certain physical actions, or it could just be neural pathways which are based on knowledge. So if we start thinking about one certain thing, we would very quickly sort of move on to things that we've associated with that particular thing. And we've got very definite patterns which have been solidified. And there is an actual process here. Every time we repeat an action, we lay down what we call myelin. And myelin is laid down and it strengthens the pathways. Here we're showing just one neuron, but obviously we've got lots of these in our pathways. You're all connected together, millions, billions of pathways. And those pathways are strengthened by the myelin sheath. Every time we repeat something, a little bit more myelin gets laid down. Over a long period of time, it may well be eroded, but if we keep repeating things, we don't forget it. The myelin sheath is strong. So during repetition and practice, the myelin wraps around the neurons, increasing the signal strength, speed. Have you ever been stood at a kitchen cupboard, open the cupboard, a tin falls out and you catch it? You have no idea how you did that. You certainly didn't think about it, right? That's your myelin, that's your neural pathway in action. It is practice, it's a behavior, it's a learned behavior. Sometimes we think it's a superpower, right? But it's not, it's just the myelin sheath from practice. The more we fire those circuits, the more myelin optimize those circuits. As I said, it can be absolutely pinned to trigger and then reaction in terms of physical movement, like catching the can out of the cupboard, or it could be that you see something on TV, a picture, and that evokes a certain memory from the past. It's the same sort of mechanism. But a child's brain and a adult's brain actually work quite differently, because when you get to about the age of 25, your myelin tends to solidify. As a child, everything's very sort of fluid and flexible. And in fact, kids can learn without thinking about it. That sounds a little bit odd. They just soak things up and the myelin is just doing its job. It's forming those neural pathways. But in adults, we've got to, we've really got to take charge of this. We call it neuroplasticity. This is how we change those pathways. This is how we change your brain. And we form new neural connections. That's what the learning process is. So when something new is learned, we form new neural connections, and it's called neuroplasticity. In adults, it needs to be deliberate. Deep sleep is the mechanism for it. So we prepare the learning during the day. It's actually deep sleep where the changes occur. But the way we are as people, things like how much exercise we get, whether or not we are practiced at learning. So for example, there is research to show that if you're good at languages, multilingualism means that you're probably going to be quite good at learning new things. There are things that you can do to make yourself better at learning. So meditation as well. But we learn by recency, repetition, practice. So I've been doing Duolingo, learning French for the last 3 years, pretty much. It's practice every day. I'm slowly getting better, but it's recency, it's repetition, and it's practice. Or it's highly focused learning. And for that, we need certain brain chemicals. So just to keep it really simple and short, there's a couple of brain chemicals which are really important. So acetylcholine and epinephrine. And epinephrine is just adrenaline for the brain, really. But it's a little bit of adrenaline, it's a little bit of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is created by focus, and urgency gives us the adrenaline. If we have those two things together, then we can, in adults, get neuroplasticity. We can really play with the learning. Neurogenesis, where we actually produce more new neurons, that's a little bit more debated. So some scientists think that in adults you can, we do have creation of new neurons, but other people sort of debate it. All right, so driving change and learning in adults. So neuroplasticity in adults. Remember, it can be by repetition, or we've got this need for urgency. So we get some stress into things, we build some adrenaline, we can create, we create alertness. And on the other side, we look at focus. So for focus, we need dopamine. That's the chemical which is related to the reward system. That tightens focus. So it's generated by these rewarding milestones. If we have both those things in place, we can get the neuroplasticity. But it needs to be directed. We need the duration, we need the activity, we need the outcome to be set. And we probably need to work on small chunks of focused learning. That would be ideal. That would be absolutely ideal. So the other option is repetition. So two mechanisms. So the traditional view, and this is pretty much up to date. This is a traditional view of learning and memory, and then we're going to move on to consider really perhaps the new way of looking at learning. But let's look at the traditional view. Skills, very much about triggers and responses, behaviours and automatic routines. And skills really is about efficiency. There are certain things that we could do just by thinking about them because we've got foundational skills to analyze and sort of model things. But if we learn something like, for example, snowboarding, the way in which we're going to get good at that, the way in which we're going to get super good at that is effectively just by doing it, right? Experiencing it. And that's building your neural pathways. That's about the myelin. So triggers and responses, behaviors and automatic routines, and efficiency. And the better you are at something, the more highly skilled you are, the less energy it will take to carry out those behaviors. So in order to learn that, we need repetition, practice, probably to practice in the right context. So snowboarding is great in terms of context because you can learn to snowboard on a dry ski slope, right? Except you're never going to be quite as good as if you do it for real on the snow. So doing it for real, using the right context, all the right inputs, that will really hone your skills. But this is very much about that repetition. or we learn through cognition. So cognition is where it's knowledge built on knowledge. So, if you knew that Manchester United was a football team, you could start then going a little bit further and start learning about the players who play for Manchester United. It's that simple. That's what we're talking about, cognitive learning. And of course, this also uses neuroplasticity. And it's enabled by, attention, some foundational skills in terms of things like pattern recognition, memory, judgment, evaluation skills, reasoning, problem solving. All of that stuff helps us with cognition, with cognitive learning. The better you are, by the way, at pattern recognition, the more intelligent you are. I don't know whether you agree or not with that, but if you did an IQ tests are about pattern recognition, right? That's it. So, this could be some of the stuff, how good we are at learning. This could be some of the stuff that really allows us to say how intelligent somebody is. But if we learn through cognition, we need to take control. We need to throw things up into the thinking brain, the front part of the brain, the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex, front part of the brain. So we take control, and then we can probably use some methods, some tools. And there's a couple that seem to be used extensively, Kolb and Honey and Mumford. So look at those in a second. Also chunking helps. Our memory is set up to remember perhaps no more than 4 things at once, just 4 things. There's a whole theory behind this, cognitive load theory. So let's look at the Kolb method. So Kolb said, if somebody's going to learn something, if it's not going to be by repetition, how can we do it? And Kolb said, well, to do it really well, you could start with giving them a concrete experience of the thing they're trying to learn. You could let them observe and reflect on it. You could let them form abstract concepts to model it, and then you can let them experiment. And if you sort of move around that circle, and different people will want to start at different parts of the cycle. But if you move around that, then most people will learn quite well. And that was sort of modified by 2 scientists called Honey and Mumford. And they then said, okay, well, actually people have got preferences, and you've got people who reflect on things, you've got reflect on what they're trying to learn, people who learn best by theorizing, pragmatists who like doing things, and activists. Curiosity is also a huge part of the equation. So if you want people, to learn, if you want to recruit people who are good at learning, finding out how curious they are about things would give you a really good head start on bringing the right people on board. The motivated desire for information and understanding, that's what curiosity is. It's actually linked to the reward system, pleasure, satisfaction, relief. But it's a real key sort of indicator for learning. Just a final thing, just in terms of the updated traditional view of learning, is perhaps coaching. Maybe mentoring as well, but specifically coaching. Because if people have got behaviours that they want to change, it's sort of deep rooted. And the way in which we model it is that you can look at the deeper part of the brain, the blue there, the limbic system, and that's where a lot of the behaviours are. So, if somebody says something to you and you respond in a certain way and you regret it afterwards, you think, I really need to stop responding in that way to that person. That's a behaviour that's learned. How do I do it? Well, we've actually got to get that into our thinking brain to take control of that routine to change it. So actually, in terms of the coaching system, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take deep-seated routines from what we might call System 1 default network. And if any of you read Daniel Kahneman's books, you'll know what System 1 is. It's the normal day way in which we operate. So our default processing, it's optimized, it's efficient, it's simple. Neuroplasticity is really specific. Myelin is really specific in terms of the neural pathways down here. Gives us shortcuts, past experience, it's really stable. But the problem is the routines are nailed up. So if we keep responding in a negative way to people, it's because it's ingrained down here. So what do we want to do? We want to throw some of this over to the control. This is where we focus on things, where we have conscious thinking, but it's inefficient. It's hard to sustain this stuff, but it does enable change. So what does a coach do? So a coach just asks questions. A coach doesn't even need to understand the subject that they're asking questions about. We're just asking questions. We're helping to pass attention from system 1 to system 2. That's where we can then take control. And that's where the cognitive learning comes in. This is where we can rewire our brain. Here is where we take control. Here is where we make the changes. So we can form new habits, responses, routines. So a coach will really just help people pass attention to system 2, so that we're in a position where we can then make change. So change, learning, obviously, it's the same thing, isn't it? So leaders can enable and coach individuals to develop the competencies. So if that's your view of learning, that's fine. That works really well. There's just some really good insights into how people learn. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to try and move it on, just from what we know about the brain now. Just going to try and move it on. But are there any questions up until this stage? See, we've got quite a lot of people on the call.
Tony, there was one question that came in actually at the beginning, and actually is probably quite relevant now, looking at some of the learning styles. And the question was, how do you manage learning while having attention deficiency?
Oh, blimey.
Just a small question.
Yeah. It's not easy, is it? But what I would say is that, people are optimized for learning in certain ways. So it's probably, I'll show you learning cycles later on, but you probably need to go with shorter learning cycles, more reward. So I'll show you this. I'll show you what I mean later on. I've got a nice slide which will probably just explain it a little bit. But it's, so people can focus, but how long they can focus for and whether or not they get distracted is another matter. So it would be a question of trying to cut down those distractions. Now, there is a really strong mechanism that we do explain in the full course, actually, on focus. You can only ever focus on one thing at once. And we actually get distracted, so our focus then shifts to one of two things, either away from danger or towards pleasure. And it's the dopamine, the pleasure bits from the dopamine, which really act on the brain to take your focus away. So, it's things like a ping on the phone is like a ping of dopamine for some people. The phone's got to be away. It will draw attention away. And you've got to make people feel safe as well. Otherwise, their attention will be drawn to something that they feel unsafe by, which could be other people, nearby. They're not sure what other people's intentions are. It could be that, you're in a situation, an environment, a physical environment where you're not absolutely sure. So it's safety. So people need to feel safe and stimulated by whatever it is that they're learning. Safe and stimulated. Now, I don't know if you guys probably don't remember what I said last year, but I probably mentioned those two words in relation to creativity: safe but stimulated. So whatever the subject is, it's got to be drawing the focus, and there's got to be few distractions, because they will take the focus. You can only focus on one thing at once. That's the key thing. But I'll show you the diagram later on. Thanks, Ina. Okay, let's look at learning and memory and advanced view, just based on brain science. Now, we've only got a few minutes really to look at it. I just want to bring out some really big key points. There's two distinct learning mechanisms. One is, as we know, procedural. So it's really information integration. So it goes back to what we're talking about, skills. It's repetition reward, and based on generally in our evolutionary history, stimuli and motor response. So we get a stimulus, some trigger, and we move in response to that trigger. So we're showing a surfer here. That will be a classic for this sort of learning. But also we've got this second one, which is reasoning or rules-based, declarative or abstract rules. If you're a mathematician If you're trying to learn algebra, you've got to understand the basics of algebra that you learned in the last lesson to move on to the next stage of algebra, right? You already understand some of the rules and then you can build on it. And these two things are absolutely complementary when it comes to learning. So you know, you can use one method or the other method depending on what you're trying to learn, or you can combine them. You know, you can use both methods. So here's a quick example. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to learn this sequence of 17 letters. Okay, so I'm going to start the timing now. Okay, so how did we do? So I don't know if you want to find the chat pod, if anybody wants to put in that sequence of letters you just learned in 10 seconds, that would be great. I haven't got the chat pod open, but I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to learn a second sequence of 17 letters. 10 seconds. Okay, 10 seconds is up. Right, so could you put in that sequence, the sequence of 17 letters a second time? Pop it in the chat pod. Of course you can. Why? Because it's based on rules, and the rules that it's based on is your rules of language and your understanding of you know, words and sequences within words. It's a really interesting concept, this. So you could have learned the first sequence, but it would have had to be by repetition because you had no rules to base it on. You could have done the repetition. So actually, for something like this exercise, obviously the rules-based cognitive learning is the way in which we learn. For something like surfing, it's repetition, isn't it? Which is absolutely ideal for that sort of trigger motor response. So I find that absolutely fascinating as a concept. So there you go. So rules-based learning is great for some things. So which system do we actually use to learn? Facts? What do you think? So how do we learn facts? Is it repetition? Or is it rules-based? Primarily, probably repetition, isn't it? You know, so how many legs does a millipede have? There's no real rules to base on, is there? Unless we've done a massive deep dive in very specific areas of biology, maybe. But most of us would just learn how many legs it has. Concepts. Which system do we use to learn concepts? And obviously, this is much more about rules-based. Has to be, because concepts are based on other concepts that we've looked at previously, or similar sort of things that we've seen previously. And then we can ask the question, you know, in terms of learning, which are more valuable in the work environment, and who learns the best. So if you're interviewing people for a job that's going to require a lot of learning, are you asking them questions in the interview based on facts that they've learned or concepts? And obviously, you know, you can see this pulls through all the way through to innovation, you know, getting people to do things in different ways. But just to really nail this, you know, there's Novak Djokovic. So the procedural learning system, it's about dopamine. In fact, sorry, I just need to move one of my menu systems. So it's repetition reward. Evolutionary history, you know, we as humans, in our evolutionary history, you know, this is early evolution. It's actually dopamine is the mechanism. It strengthens those neural pathways. You've got to give the dopamine reward within about 2 seconds. Any dog trainer will tell you, if you get a dog to do something new, you've got to reward it with a treat within 2 seconds, right? Otherwise, it can't associate the reward with the learning. And it's stimuli motor response. Generally, you know, this works best as a learning technique, really, for muscle memory. Well, we call it muscle memory. It isn't, it's just your neural pathways. It's habits and automatic responses, because the myelin speeds the response, right? Speeds the communication within the brain. It's the myelin that's doing this. And just to be clear on this, many other animals learn like this. Animals learn like this. The declarative or reasoning learning system, this is rule-based. Evolutionary It's much newer. Probably, part of the thing that makes humans humans. It uses working and long-term memory. It's cognitive learning. It's energy intensive. It needs alertness and focus, because that's the way in which we produce neuroplasticity in humans, isn't it? Alertness and focus, acetylcholine and epinephrine. We need that. And just to be absolutely clear about this, most other animals don't learn like this. They can't learn like this. There's one or two animals that sort of get somewhere near it, but certainly no other animal is as good as a human at learning like this, as far as we know. So neuroplasticity, we said 2 ways, right? Procedural, repetition, reward, reasoning and rule-based. So alertness and focus is what we need for this. So if we're just concentrating on the reasoning and rule-based, physiology is important, sleep, hydration, getting people in the right state to learn. And then it's highly focused learning, maximum 45 minutes, maybe 90 minutes with practice. It actually helps if we can then, after the learning, rest or disengage. So for me, it would be cycling, right? For me, that's low energy, believe it or not. Certainly brain-wise, it's low energy. But really, the learning happens in deep sleep. Can you guys see that last box? Or I'm not sure what's correct. Okay, so it's deep sleep. This is where the neuroplasticity happens. The rest and disengagement is actually optional. You don't need to do that, but apparently it does help. So the highly focused learning, well, if we can, we get high alertness and arousal, so focused. So that's your epinephrine. Alertness and arousal. That's your stress hormone, so epinephrine or adrenaline. And we need to be focused, so deliberate focus. And by the way, for most people, mental focus follows visual focus. So if anybody tells you, a good PowerPoint slide isn't how you should be teaching, show me another way of getting the visual focus of people. That's great. You don't have to use PowerPoint, but it is a great way of getting visual focus. And that's where you get the acetylcholine. So just to reiterate, we're looking for epinephrine, which is a bit of urgency. We're looking for acetylcholine, focus, urgency, focus. I'll come back to this in a second, because when we're actually putting those pathways together, when we are learning, what we're doing is we're either building new pathways or we're strengthening the old pathways. Remember, we're laying down the myelin. Or we're building multiple pathways that might be parallel. So same information, we're just learning it in a different form. It might be that, we learned that a millipede has got, I don't know, how many legs has a millipede got? I'm going to say 100. I have no idea. Or I might decide that actually the millipede has got 10 sets of 10 legs. Same information, just different forms, different multiple pathways. Or we are linking pathways together, sequential, different info that's linked together. And we could actually be erasing pathways, not erasing, but replacing pathways. A really good idea, sorry, a really good example there is that when you learn a new password for your computer, you tend to forget the old one. By repetition, you very quickly embed the new one because the trigger's the same. You just go down a different neural pathway with your new password. If I ask you to remember don't do this, by the way. If I ask you to remember your old password, it will really confuse a lot of people because you're reactivating that other the other pathway. Right. So they're the things we can do. New pathways, strengthen pathways, multiple pathways, sequential, different information linked. So here's a really good diagram. Sorry, before I get on to that, just another point here is that understanding is interesting, which it means you probably, hopefully, got a really good idea as to the map of the connections that you've got, which pertain to any one particular subject area. So if you understand the map of the connections, you've got probably a really good understanding. All right, so what we're here today for is to really look at things like, well, what can I do as a leader to help my people learn? So we know what we need. So I've just told you that you need urgency, epinephrine, and attention and focus, acetylcholine. We can link pathways, we can strengthen pathways, and we can build multiple pathways. They're the pathways in the brain. You can then look at all the different forms of learning and getting people to assimilate information, change the behaviors, whatever it is. And we can sort of look at which of these learning methods down the left-hand side causes the urgency and the attention. We can look at how we link paths together, strengthen paths, build multiple pathways. It's really interesting when you look at this. This week I'm in South Africa doing a mini MBA, and one of the really big parts of the mini MBAs is group work, group presentations, and simulations. Look at how many of these areas we are ticking the box on. Group work, presentations back to us as the trainers at the end of the week. So simulations, presentations, where are we? Yeah, group presentations there. So we're using simulations, group presentations, group work. They're the really big ones. They tick all the boxes. They've got to work hard. So we've got the urgency. They're presenting on Friday. It's competitive. We're going to wind up the competition during the week. They're focused on a simulation, absolutely focused on a context-based set of exercises. And then we're linking pathways to their existing knowledge. We're strengthening, so we're consolidating because they're using the simulation as they build the presentation during the week to go over some of the things, some of the ideas that we talked about. And we're looking at things from a completely different perspective. So this week, we're doing a lot of the other stuff as well, but in particular, why this week works so well is simulations, group presentations, group work. Does that make sense? Right, great. Coming towards the end now, not too many more things to look at. So we've got procedural, repetition, reward, reasoning, rule-based. We can actually maximize learning by aligning the context. If you understand telecoms, we want to build knowledge on telecoms. That will be quite efficient for learning in telecoms. Use visual cues because that's the focus, right? We can space study if we want to do that because of repetition, which we'll look at in a couple of seconds. We can actually interleave topics. It's been shown that making things difficult for people to learn rather than making it easy can actually have a better long-term impact. So if you put people into a room and sit them down and spoon feed them in terms of same place throughout the day, uninterrupted learning, and really good visual books, everything on a plate for them, you'll get great feedback. But actually, if you make it more difficult for them, if for those people who are okay with this, things like a noisy environment, perhaps where they've really got to work to find somewhere to quiet to study. Perhaps you change their environment every time they sit down to study the same topic. If you interleave it with other topics, all of that will give you worse feedback as a trainer. But there's studies to show that actually that gives you better long-term retention. So vary the methods. We can also use tests as learning. So testing is really powerful. Apparently testing is much better than re-exposure to information because it's getting you yourself to reignite those neural pathways. It's getting you to find your way through your own neural pathways and strengthen them rather than just somebody telling you the information again. So recall is more powerful than information re-exposure, but it also gives you feedback on what you've already learned, what you already know, and it motivates for subsequent studying. Even a trainer that sort of asks you to think about something before he or she gives you the answer, that pause to let you think about it actually has an impact. Okay, just a couple of the things to look at. I did say that we'd look at focus and effort. So in general, we learn like this. In terms of our effectiveness of learning, our focus and effort it gets impaired after a certain time, but dopamine tends to re-energize and then re-energize again. So regular breaks with whatever it is that, you know, gives you the dopamine. So I think it's quite easy. I'm not saying you should start smoking, but people who smoke, it would be the cigarette, right? With people who love coffee, it would be the coffee. For other people, it would be just the fact you've got a break. Some people might like cake or whatever. But in general, we study, ideally it's 25 minutes. So there's a question earlier about, you know, if somebody's got attention deficit, you know, we're asking them to study for more than 25 minutes, for example. You know, it's hard. It's learned, it's practiced for many of us to get it up to perhaps 1 hour. And actually in the training that I do within telecoms quite often, you know, we use 1.5 hours. It's not ideal, but we're practiced at it. It tends to be the industry norm. But we break for 5 minutes or maybe up to 15 minutes. We've got to be mindful of this sort of stuff, the actual practicalities. And a really big thing is the forgetting curve. So a lot of research has been done on this. If you just expose somebody to information just once over, well, there you go, in a number of days, you know, they would tend to forget it quite quickly. If you re-expose them a second time, we can prolong it. Third time, you know, this is how much we're remembering on this skill. Look at that. Fourth time, you know, we're hardly forgetting anything. So when was the last time you did a training course that had a follow-up re-exposure to the information and to the training? It never happens, does it? So just to sort of finish off, knowledge, storage and information, if you wanted to look at it using this sort of model, knowledge, storage and information, and understanding and critical thinking, this allows you to take this stuff and put it all together in a model and to make sense of it, to understand your neural pathways. So better ability to do this helps you create links in terms of your knowledge and your information storage. And your knowledge and information storage develops and reinforces your critical thinking skills, etc. You know, again, it's a two-way thing in terms of learning. Okay, that was a really quick run around. I think probably did about 35, 37 minutes there, but any questions? You know, I can't see the chat.
That's fine. We've got a couple of questions that have already come in on chat, Tony. So if people do want to add any more questions, please do. But the first one came in from Charlie Oliver. How do you manage learning with technologies, generative AI technologies such as ChatGPT that are optimized to learn at an accelerated rate based on kind of language models that are surpassing humanity's ability to learn? So with things like ChatGPT, how will this change how we learn?
Oh,
another big question. Huge
question, yeah. So I think there's always this human element, isn't there? You know, I always think that people have evolved. You know, whether you believe in evolution or not, you know, we are at a stage of our development where you know, we can sort of look at what we're good at as human beings. So it's things like, you know, storytelling. You know, we live stories. I mean, we all watch movies, right? You know, Marvel movies or whatever it is. You know, that's the story. That's the equivalent of, in the old days, sitting around a campfire with the village elders telling us all about the ancestors. It's exactly the same thing. You know, there's certain things that you can look at, like Facebook. You know, when I first saw Facebook, I thought, and I saw my kids using Facebook, I'm thinking, you'll never replace what we had as a kid with all that social interaction on our street where we lived in the UK. And then I noticed actually what they're doing with Facebook was they were just keeping in touch with people, and they're actually still organizing the actual meetings at the weekend. I think, oh, okay, so Facebook is just replacing the physical proximity that we had on the streets where I grew up. So what I think what I'm saying is, any sort of new technology that comes through, in general, the technology that does the best is the one that helps us live our lives as humans, eventually. So ChatGPT, where are we at with that? So we're putting out training programs, right? And we're still teaching humans how to learn things and all the rest of it. And I have actually used ChatGPT, for example, to actually specify 1 or 2 training courses. And and I've only used it really sparingly just to test it out. And when I'm specifying training courses, it works pretty well. However, I've also had requests in from people, and I've looked at the writing, I looked at the way in which things are worded, and I think, no, they've used ChatGPT for this. I think in general, it's gonna be an absolute game changer for many things. But just like transportation was not a thing, mass thing before the invention of the motor car. Humans just adapt and perhaps work around it and use it as a really fantastic tool, unless it gets hijacked, usually by big corporates who would use it in a slightly different way. So just looking at telecoms, there's lots of things which are coming through that telecoms companies could do if they had just slightly better tools. And AI is one of those tools, I think. So a lot of innovations that telecoms companies could help other industries digitalize, whatever that means to them. They're not quite there yet. So machine learning is a big one. Believe it or not, machine learning is something that we're going to see in radio networks when you use your mobile phone, your 4G mobile phone, 5G mobile phone. Machine learning will be in the background, learning about connectivity patterns for people with mobile phones, and it will be making it more efficient and hopefully cutting down the energy use for mobile phone companies, so we can all be a little bit greener. I think ChatGPT is probably one of those technologies which will be a really good useful tool in many different realms.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a quick comment from Lindsay, which was around, she works for the National Health Service in the UK, and she said they use patient stories and patient experience in healthcare to motivate change, and really helps people remember the story and the impact too. So totally with you on that one, Lindsay.
So what you're doing with the storytelling is you're activating a lot of different brain chemicals and using the emotion there. So oxytocin is a big one. So that's where you're going for the empathy within the story. The cliffhanger, if you're telling a story and there's a real cliffhanger in it, that's your dopamine. You're playing with those brain chemicals. Yeah, storytelling's huge, and it can definitely be used very positively in learning.
Thanks. And then Chris has said, would quizzes have the same benefits as testing in a training session?
Absolutely, yeah, because all you're trying to do is get people to go over those neural pathways and strengthen them. That's what you're trying to get them to do, or to understand how their neural pathways relate to each other. Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, do you want to articulate your comment that you've popped in? Because I know that Charlie Oliver's kind of said, yes, that's what she had in mind too.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Tony. It was really fascinating. I listened to a program where the CEO of DeepMind, is it Darius Hassabis, was talking. And he's a really clever guy, and he was talking about how he taps into video games to retrain how he thinks. I think that was the gist of what he was saying, that you go and do that. And I was just thinking, is that an example of adjusting your neuroplasticity? And does that have an application in organizations?
Completely. And when you think about it as well, it's not just the neural pathways, it's things that go with it, like the confidence to use those neural pathways, because at the end of the day, your prefrontal cortex is on standby there to stop you doing something daft. Because if you've got really nice nailed up neural pathways, which you've used several times before without any issues, your neural pathway, your prefrontal cortex will just go on to standby. It won't intervene. And actually a really good example of this is when I was in the Navy. If we had to train on really fairly dangerous malfunction, what to do in the case of a malfunction of the aircraft, you lose an engine or whatever. We never did that on live aircraft, we did occasionally, but at night trying to get the helicopter back on the ship at night with a single engine failure, you'd never practice that for real, too much money at stake. So we had the full motion simulator, and the full motion simulator gives you the right context. So it's full motion, it moves a little bit like a helicopter, not quite like the real thing. All the buttons are in all the right places, the right communications there. You've got communication with the outside world, with the tower and the area radar people. It contextualized it, and we did it very often so that if it happened for real, the neural pathways would kick in. Hopefully not too rusty, because hopefully it's not 6 months since we did those simulation training, but it's your neural pathways. And I often think that actually firemen in a burning building would benefit from augmented or virtual reality training sessions. It's an absolute no-brainer for me. There are some things which you just shouldn't practice for real, but augmented reality, virtual reality would be fantastic substitutes. Yeah. But we could go further, couldn't we? We could. Anybody see the old John Cleese videos from years ago, 1970s? After he finished with Monty Python, he did a whole series of business videos to help managers with just simple things like negotiation or conflict resolution, that sort of stuff. Really great videos, just so that people could see how perhaps you can do things slightly better within business. Really outdated now, not even a computer inside those videos. But then a good trainer would take some of those videos and then role play. So it is role play. But so whether you do it role play or whether you do it using technology, I think it's contextualizing things, and it's just trying to practice those routines and taking conscious control. So your prefrontal cortex helping you make those changes.
I really appreciate we're nearly out of time, but I know that people are finding this incredibly interesting. So Lindsay, you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you.
Excellent, thanks, Zena. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating stuff, Tony, and I want to learn more. So have you got a Twitter page? Do you do any social medias? Have you published anything? Is there anything I can learn more about?
So the answer is yes, soon.
Okay.
so we've taken an absolute age to get this people-oriented, brain-aligned leadership course out there, but it's just about there. We're gonna launch in. I think we've set a date for July. So we're gonna launch, and there'll be. We'll probably look at having it in different formats. So probably, Lindsay, just send me an email. Hopefully you got my email. You got. I'll give you my email address actually.
Shall I pop it into chat?
Yes, please.
Tony?
Yeah, if that's right, Zine, if you will do that. Yeah. That's great.
Thank you.
Either one will do. Either the outcome one or my Gmail one will do. Yeah, Lindsay, send me an email and I'll get some information to you.
Awesome, brilliant. Sure. Thank you so much.
And no problem. Actually, before we finish, there's a really interesting comment actually. Now I can't say your name, but it sounds like it DGHR. They use. Would you like to kind of explain a bit more?
This is Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you for joining us.
From UAE, actually.
Great.
And actually, I'm using Rockin's genetic behavior science.
Okay. Yeah.
Where we can assess people also, talented people, or even people for HR, if they want to have a particular interview with them, we can know who's the right person for the right seat also. And for the talented people, we will do their assessment without asking them any question. We will we'll use biometric actually.
It's based on biometrics. Fantastic. Yeah. I'll be honest with you. Yeah. That sounds brilliant. I'd be really fascinated to learn really what you guys can get out of the genetics and the biometrics. That'd be really fascinating. I mean, on the training course that we have, what we do is we look at people's preferences. So I don't know if many people have done much work on Herman brain profiling, things like that. So traditionally, we show those models as being front left brain, front right brain, back left brain, back right brain, and it seems to be just preferences. Yeah, I think we oh, perfect. Yeah. We spotted a link, what we think is a link between the brain chemicals and those preferences. So that's as far as we've gone. It sounds like you've gone a lot further actually in terms of the genetics.
Yeah, actually what we do, we do an assessment which will take 10 minutes maximum, 10 to 20 minutes. Then
Yeah.
within 2 days, we will get the full report about the person whom since he was 3 weeks in his mother womb till today.
Yeah.
So we'll know if it was a mother mistake during the pregnancy, if she is affected emotionally, or if some accident happened to her, it will affect the child.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Then we'll know what kind of a training he needs actually.
Oh, that'd be fascinating to learn more on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll come to know his gaps, his challenges, why he's suffering at this age, for example, where after birth, why such children are suffering, why such adults or even university students or even doctors, why they are so, actually I have a center, and this center we are doing all these kind of things. Where I have from 0 age till 65 years.
Yeah.
And we took one of the ladies, she was having Alzheimer. She was 65, now she is okay. Just we gave her a small technique to keep on reading books. Slowly, she got back her things, and even the protein in her face has been changed also.
Okay.
So now she is teaching small kids.
Yeah, brilliant. No, thanks for sharing that. That's excellent. That's yeah, it's really good to see that different parts of the world even are just doing different things, which are really innovative in terms of competencies. I like to use that term competencies, rather, the ability to do something rather than.
We're doing it. We're doing the CBT actually, which is related to the competencies.
That's brilliant. Fab.
Yeah, cognitive behavior. We are doing it also. When the people will sit in front of us, we can read them. We can know if they are suffering from a certain disease or a certain thing. We will know by when they are talking, when they are communicating with us.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. That's perfect.
In addition, also, we are also, I'm a nutritional psychology actually, and I will be able to know if the mother was eating the proper food while she was pregnant, which will affect the child also. Then we will advise him to eat a certain food. We'll give him a full plan of what he's supposed to eat.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds very holistic.
Yes.
Thanks for that. That's perfect.
And we have seen marvelous changes on the people.
Yeah, I bet you have. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your effort.
Thank you.
No problem.
And thank you, Tony. We're a bit over time, and yet we've still got 25 people on the line, which I just think goes to show how interesting that topic is. And I'm sure we'd love to invite you back again next year for another slice of your expertise. I think, Tony, you probably need to head off, but if there are any burning questions that somebody wants to connect with Tony, you've got his email in the chat function, or you're welcome to contact me, zina@ideasuk.com, and I will link you up as well. So thank you so much, Tony. Great session, really appreciate it, and lovely to hear the comments coming as well at the end too from other participants. So yeah, do join us for the next session as well. It might not be quite as highbrow as this one, but maybe more practical based. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody. Take care. Thanks for joining.